Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse and welcome to yet another episode in our April Wine series. Tonight the panel is looking at Attitude from 1993. I want to welcome John Clauser from My Music Corner, Tim Durling from Tim's Vinyl Confessions, Dave Luben, and Nick S Squire from the Contrarians. So without any further ado, let's get started and look at April Wine from 1993. Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight is yet another in our April Wine series. Tonight we are looking at Attitude. Attitude was the 13th studio album from Canadian rock band April Wine, released October of 1993. This was the first album since the breakup in the 80s. This is the first album since Walking Through Fire from 1986. And by the way, if you see the album cover, here's the album cover. And like Mr. Clauser has over there, that's Miles Goodwin's son. There you go. Not too sure if I really dig this cover, but you know. This is recorded and mixed by Neil Golden and produced by Miles Goodwin and co-produced by George Lagos. So the lineup on this one, it's Miles Goodwin who's back, Brian Greenway's back, Steve Siegel. I don't know if any of you gentlemen know who Steve Siegel is. I tried to do a search on the gentleman and I kept getting Steven Seagal and his guitar collection.
I know a little bit.
Okay. Jim Clinch is back and Jerry Mercer. So it's kind of a split between the old lineup and the new. Nice to see Jim back in the fold. And of course, it's always nice to hear the powerhouse drumming of Jerry Mercer. So anyway, I want to introduce John Clauser, Tim Durling, and Dave Lubin here tonight. We might see Nick S Squire, and here he is. He's right here. We'll let Nick in. And 3, 2. Okay. All right.
He's fashionably
anyway, Nick
late.
S Squire's coming in. So this is how we roll on. It's very loose, very loose. So anyway, we're looking at Attitude from 1993, and I'm going to turn it over to my good friend Tim Durling. There he is, Nick S Squire. How are you? Nice to see you tonight.
All right. Yeah, how you guys doing?
Hey, we just kind of got it started, and we're turning it over to Tim Durling right now. And we'll just go Tim, and I guess, well, I don't know. We'll just wing it. I guess we'll go Tim, John, Dave, and then Nick, and wind it up with me. We'll try to go a half an hour. Whip through it. Tell me what you like about it. Songs you like. Give it your rating, and I'll compile them all at the end, and we'll give a rating to the masses. All right, Tim Durling, take it away.
Thanks, Grant. This is fun because this is actually my entry point into April Wine. I'd certainly heard of them, but this is the first time I started buying albums by them. A good friend of mine had lent me 2 CDs. He lent me the compilation All the Rockers, which is great, and he lent me this Attitude, which was their then current album. And I'm not sure about worldwide, but I know here in Canada this came out in the spring of 93. I know that the first single was If You Believe in Me. It was on the radio May, June, but this actually got some attention worldwide. And I've always thought it a shame that they couldn't have inked an international deal, because this album actually went gold in Canada, and the song That's Love broke the top 40 on the Billboard mainstream rock chart, got all the way to 33, which is not bad for an independent release. This came out on Flood Ross Entertainment. Now, Flood Ross Entertainment is essentially the same as Aquarius, because Flood is Terry Flood, one of their original managers and label bosses. And just, I'm blanking at the first name of Ross is, but it was distributed by EMI in Canada. But I don't think it got any distribution on a major label outside of Canada, which is a shame. This is a hard rocking album from start to finish. It's probably the heaviest April Wine album. They seem to have discovered drop D tuning on here, or at least detuning, tuning everything down a full step. So you've got a lot of bottom end. For a self-produced album, Miles produced this, as Grant said. I think it's a fantastic sounding album. I think it's holds its own with anything that was produced in a fancy studio. So as we know, Walking Through Fire was the last April Wine album on the Capitol contract. They'd already split up by then. Miles Goodwin and Brian Greenway both put out solo efforts in 1988. Both were on Atlantic Records in the States. Now, how they linked to Atlantic Records, I'm not sure. It's too bad they couldn't have come out on Atlantic with this album. But Miles started receiving phone calls asking about, hey, how about a new April Wine album? And he was getting them from all over Canada, from Los Angeles, and so I think sometime in the late 80s, some form of April Wine reformed. Dave might know more of the history of that, but I know Aquarius had put out all those compilation albums. Their music was still getting played a lot. So obviously there was demand for their music. And the end result came out in 1993 sometime. And yes, it's the album Attitude. That's Miles Goodwin's son Aaron on the cover. Kind of a low budget album. Here, kid, put this on, blah, 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 blah. But doesn't matter. The music is great. They did let's see, there's a video for If You Believe in Me, there's a video for That's Love. They also released two other ballads on the album, Voice in My Heart and Can't Take Another Night were singles. There's a real mix on this album of heavy, light. It's the first album they put out in the CD age. It's a long album, I believe. There are 14 songs on this album. So, it's got a little bit of that CD syndrome. I would personally chop a couple of the songs off and have a really lean 12-song album. But I really, really like the majority of the songs. I actually saw them for the first time in concert on the following tour, which was only the next year later. I saw them in 1994. And they opened the show with Here's Looking at You, Kid. And it was probably one of the loudest concerts I've ever been at. It was just at a small club, and they're playing it like it's an arena, like they've got the stacks. And I had major tinnitus, like it was too loud. But they played a lot of songs from both of their new albums. But they opened with Here's Looking at You, Kid. That is a heavy, that almost kind of reminds me of Extreme because it's got a little bit of heavy funk going on in it. Better Slow Down is a fast, heavy shuffle. And I think all of the ballads on here, like Miles always did great ballads, but I think all of the ballads on here are really, really good. Some of them were written with other people, but If You Believe in Me is a classic April Wine power ballad. You could almost look at it as a spiritual successor to Just Between You and Me. Hour of Need is an acoustic ballad, really good. My personal favorites, Can't Take Another Night. I think that's a Brian Greenway co-write, and Voice in My Heart's another good one. Emotional Dreams should have been a single, I think. That would have sounded good on the radio in the summertime. I love the title and the expression, good from far, far from good. And I don't know, I've always liked this album. It's weird doing the series now because I've been listening to this album longer than any other April Wine album, even though it's relatively new. And speaking of things that are new, I just picked this up not too long ago. For the very first time last year, Aquarius put this out on vinyl. And that's still in the wrap. Apparently it's transparent, purple, blue, and red vinyl.
Wow.
Very shiny. But yeah, it's good to have this with an Aquarius logo on it. I'm hoping they continue this trend, but and now that I look at this for the very first time, this only has 10 songs on it. Posing they did it, so they didn't have to sell it as a double record. But anyway, so it's got Give It a Taking It, If You Believe in Me, That's Love, It Hurts, Here's Looking at You, Kid, Better Slow Down, Strange Kind of Love, Can't Take Another Night, Voice of My Heart, and Girl of My Dreams. Yeah, those are not the 10 songs exactly I would have picked. That's funny. I'm just realizing that now, and I've had this for about a month. But a good album, a really, really good album. Obviously there was people missed them, and they hit the road again. And I like this lineup. They brought Jim Clench back, who hadn't been in the band since 1975. So they brought him back and his vocals, which is cool. So then they could do What a Night, Weeping Widow, and it would sound, like people are used to it sounding. I always got this mental image when I saw them live because when I saw them, they did Schizoid Man, and they did it really, really well. But I remember I was thinking, Clench comes back and they're rehearsing, and he goes, "Oh, you're not going to make me learn this, are you?" But anyway, I digress. It's a core lineup that people knew: Miles Goodwin, Brian Greenway, Jerry Mercer.
Mhm.
For Gary Moffat, I guess he and Goodwin weren't getting along, so he didn't come back. And they didn't bring back Richie Henman or any of those guys. Steve Segal, we'll say it's Segal like that,
Yeah.
Segal.
Mhm.
Now, I only know who he was because he had just played in Aldo Nova's band. Because in '91, Aldo put out the Blood on the Bricks album. He's actually pictured, I think, on the inside of that album, the band that he had at the time, which also included Phil X. But Steve Segal played a lot of slide guitar. So I don't know what his background was prior to that. That's the only other place I know him from. Another funny story about that guy. Um, when I saw them in '94, it was me and three buddies. We actually met Miles and Jim and Brian because they were staying in the same motel we were. They were, so got their autographs, you know, didn't take a lot of their time, got out of the way. On our way to the gig, we're walking to the gig. There's this long-haired guy carrying a guitar case coming back. I'm like, is that Steve Segal? Is that Steve Segal? Is that Steve? No, I'm not going to say anything. Anyway, walked past, didn't say anything. Got on stage dressed just the same. Yeah, that was him. So I could have gotten 4 out of the 5 autographs that night, but I don't know why he was heading back, but he came again in time for the show. Great hard rocking album. Doesn't really it doesn't really remind me of any particular April Wine album, mostly because the production is so dare I say modern sounding. Like it's a really high fidelity album, especially for self production. Now there's a couple songs on it I'm not the fondest of. I think It Hurts doesn't have much of a chorus. I know what they were going for. They were trying to revisit that whole stop everything down, and then Miles just says something like All Over Town, where he goes, "I don't care."
Mhm.
And it wasn't worth revisiting. But the one I didn't really care for it much then. I don't really like it much now either. Is Love Your Stuff, which is every bit as awkward as the title. LUV, love, by the way.
Yeah.
Particularly, sometimes it has to do with I'm not buying it coming from who's singing it, and when Miles says "get busy," I lose it every time. It takes me out of the song and I start laughing. But look, that's minor. I think it's an album full of good songs, and for a short while they had a little bit of a comeback. Unfortunately, it didn't stay that way. But I really wish this album had gotten a major label. I think it might have gotten them back on a foothold in the States because it had been such a long time since they'd been on a US label. They've never been able to get on a consistent basis on the circuits with all of the other old bands, and they blow every one of those bands off the stage because they are so tight no matter what lineup I've seen them in. So anyway, needless to say, I'm a big fan of this album. I give it a 9 out of 10.
Whoa, excellent. I didn't think you'd rate it that high, but I like what I'm hearing. All right. Thank you, Tim. John Clauser, let's throw it over to you. What's your thoughts on 1993's Attitude?
I really can't add a whole lot to what Tim said. I found this to be it was like April Wine, welcome to the '90s, and it just had it just had that '90s kind of sound. So it was like a lot of the bands that had this kind of that modern sound. It just reminded me so much of what was coming out of that time period.
Mhm.
So I was digging it. Yeah, it's definitely a happy album, which of course I liked. It has a nice balance of the heavy to soft, the softer songs, and kind of some middle stuff. I liked giving it, taking it. I thought it was a great opening track. I dug That's Love. That was a good one. Love Here's Looking at You, Kid. That's just, to me, that was a great song. I like the other ballads of the album. I'm with Tim though. Love Your Stuff, where they goes to the Naughty Halter school of spelling.
Yeah.
So Yeah, this is one I kind of want to visit a little bit more because I feel like I haven't really spent the quality time with this thing until just really recently. But I really dug it. I really like it. I'm gonna say an 8 with it for the time being.
Okay.
I just really liked how everything sounded with it. The guitars just sounded so nice. The drums, everybody just sounded so, man, it was just tightly mixed, and just everything sounded good. I was impressed with this one. I'll probably say more on when we get to Frigate, but yeah, I liked this one too. This was a good one. This will be interesting when I try to revisit everything again and say, okay, now let's get a ranking together.
Right.
This is gonna make things interesting a little bit, but
Well, we'll rank them all when we wrap this dog up. We might have to do,
right.
when we do the last two albums, we may have to just do I'm just thinking we might just do a ranking show after to tie it all together. And, that's a good idea.
But I think for me, I think my top tracks were probably Here's Looking at You, Here's Looking at You, Kid, That's Love, and Giving It, Taking It. Those were probably my three favorites from this one.
Right. But you like hard rock, you like metal, you probably was digging these guitar tones and stuff.
Big time.
I mean, this is the heaviest, like Tim was saying. I don't think April Wine has ever been this heavy.
No.
No, not
I mean,
done
they
before.
were ready to come back, and they were ready to rock hard, and they do on this record.
And I think some of the songs even would have sounded a little heavier if they'd have dialed back the keyboards on some of them.
Well,
But
yeah, but I don't think it really takes away from the power of this record.
No, it's a minor
Really.
thing.
Minor.
Yeah.
Well, Dave Lubin, what do you think about this record?
All right. So thank you, everyone. And I'll give you a little bit of background. They went back to touring in 1992. I actually saw one of the very first concerts that they had when they went back to touring. It was in Oshawa, Ontario. And what was kind of different about that is that I had seen 3 April Wine concerts before that, and it was it was in the Montreal Forum, and it was like a 20,000 seat arena. And suddenly I'm seeing April Wine perform in a bar, and to the point that if you want to, you can go right up to the stage, and you can whatever, he'll shake your hand, he'll do all that. But the other thing that was really cool about that particular show was, first of all, the return of Jim Clench was great for me, because I always really liked the Jim Clench songs, as we know from past reviews. So I remember the concert started, and it was kind of a typical of the ones I'd seen, where it was like very focused on the U.S. Capitol released records, and he went about 5 songs. And I just remember the thrill. I said, wait a minute, he's going to play Weeping Widow, and I'm going to hear it sung by John Clench. So that was by Jim Clench. And that was really exciting. And then from that point on, you got a good mix of early albums, some of the newer albums. They did at least 30, I think 35 songs. It was like going to a Springsteen show that night. I mean, they just went on and on and on. And like sometimes they went deep. I remember them playing songs like Victim of Your Love off of Stand Back. And it's like, wow, they're playing that. And there was others. They played Cat's Claw from Electric Jewels. I mean, I think they really went for it, because I think part of the deal of bringing Jim Clench back was, hey, I want to sing my songs, guys. So they brought him back, and it was just great. On this Attitude album, Tim definitely reviewed a lot of some of the background. I'll just point out 4 of the songs made Canada's top 100. The funny thing is, I only remember hearing If You Believe in Me on the radio. That one reached number 19. When I reviewed this album, so I found that there was actually 3 videos, and I remember If You Believe in Me was played on what we called Much Music back there, and it's still called that. But there was 2 others, and I really like these videos. First of all, the one, Good From Far, Far From Good, it has them in the studio, and they're taking turns, and
that's
they're singing,
right,
and they're showing harmonies. I really like that video. I think it's like simple, but I really like it, and I really like, and I love the song That's Love. I mean, I just think that's just a great head banging tune. That might be my 5th or 6th favorite April Wine song. There's something about that song when it's on. It's also just the instrumentals in it are so cool. Like they hit those guitar notes like really hard, and it's just such a great song. And like I said, when you watch the video, it's like such a 90s video. It's done like in the mountains. It looks like on the side of the road. You've got like the pretty girls in it. You got all that going on. It's a really fun video. So if you guys haven't seen it, it's on YouTube. Take a look at it. As far as my review, I consider this album, it's good. I think it was interesting hearing you guys talk. I think Harder Faster is still a harder rocking album overall than this one. I think mainly because Harder Faster doesn't have a ballad on it. Whereas this one, I don't think you consider Before the Dawn a ballad. It's like kind of one of those mixed tunes. But I think it was a very solid album. I think overall much better than, let's say, Animal Grace and Walking Through Fire. Yeah, I mean, it has that great April Wine opener. I think Given It Taken is a really fun song. And then, yeah, like you guys, Good From Far, Far From Good. What's kind of interesting about this album is that, as you know, in other albums I've reviewed, I've always said, oh, I really like the ballads. This one, I like the hard rockers. Like the If You Believe in Me, it's okay. It's not one of my favorites, really. As I said, I talked about That's Love. I talk about how this album kind of starts dropping off a little bit for me with the song It Hurts. I don't find that song interesting at all. But then they have one called Hour of Need. I find it kind of has a little bit of a comeback. And then I like you guys. I like Here's Looking at You, Kid. And then some other ones I find have some really nice harmonies. Can't Take Another Night and Voice in My Heart. I find he does some nice things in instrumental harmonies. The rest of the album wasn't too interesting for me. My basic review is I give it a solid 7 out of 10. It was a nice comeback. I don't think it's as good as anything from Electric Jewels to Power Play, but I do think as an album overall, it's better than Animal Grace or Walking Through Fire. And it also brought back the April Wine logo, which I always liked. So they did that album for the Animal Grace and Walking Through Fire. I don't know why they got away from it.
See, I never understood that either. Why? We've talked about this before,
Yeah.
but why on earth would you
Logo's
get
such a
rid of
brand,
those
and it's such a
logos?
cool logo too, and so identifiable.
Why would you lose that branding?
You're right too, Dave. I forgot about Good From Far, Far From Good, but I don't remember seeing that back in the day. It was years later, like it was YouTube before I realized they had done a studio video for that. But yeah, That's Love. There's some production value there. Like it's kind of a cheesy video, but money was spent. Like it actually kind of looks kind of pro.
Oh no, it's a good video, and yeah, like I said, it has that real feel of that '90s video. The one thing that's interesting is that I sort of look at this. I thought maybe they had hoped to have that major comeback the way Aerosmith did, because you remember what a big, huge. I mean, Aerosmith became bigger than they ever were in the late '80s, early '90s, and there was a few rock bands like that had like this like major like second wave, particularly Aerosmith, like, because in '70s they were like popular band, but they were never they had a whole new stratosphere in the early '80s, early '90s, the late '80s, and I think April Wine was hoping to kind of pick up on that. I think That's Love, as Tim pointed out, did make the top tracks on Billboard for top rock tracks, so it must have been played on some AOR stations down here, I'm imagining. But as I said, the only
thought that was
song I
pretty
had ever heard.
impressive to get that much play, that it charted at 33 for an indie album. So yeah, it's just a shame that they didn't get a major label pick them up for this one, because I'm not saying it would have gone gold or platinum, but they would have had a shot anyway if they'd had some promo down there.
Well, I mean, even though this was independently released in Canada, I mean, their home country, how was this?
It was distributed by EMI. So this is right around the time, like late '93. This is when I started working in radio. So I remember the sampler discs would come out, the EMI sampler discs, and they'd have whatever new releases from anyone on any of the EMI labels, regardless of genre. And so I remember Can't Take Another Night, Voice of My Heart, and obviously If You Believe in Me and That's Love. They were really pushing. They were trying to get the singles on the air, and I remember we played them, but we're in Woodstock, Woodstock, New Brunswick, we're birthplace of Miles Goodwin, so we should be playing April Wine. But yeah, I definitely remember playing the singles from this album, and getting into it all along at the same time. I still remember buying it and being like, wow, this is, it's not just getting into an old band, but it's getting into an old band that's got some current stuff out that I'm really digging. Yeah, I'm sure that every veteran band looked at Aerosmith and were like, how can we do that? But that was lightning in a bottle. Not everybody's going to have a comeback like that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, Aerosmith was able to do it, and those records, I mean, whether you like that time period or not, there's a lot of great stuff on those albums. They never really lost it. It was another chapter in Aerosmith's life or career, but some great stuff. All right, Dave, I appreciate that. A 7. I accept that. I accept that. Nick S Squire, let's pop over to you. What's your whole thoughts on Attitude?
Thanks, Grant. I'm
Okay.
going to be a wet blanket here.
Okay.
Let me get right to it. 14 songs. Tim alluded to it. It could have been trimmed down. I felt that towards the end of this album, as Dave hinted, that this listening experience was work. I thought that this album was released 4 years too late. This album would have been phenomenal or 5 years, 88, 89, 90. It would have checked off all the boxes. It would have been right in there with the better bands of the time. But I think by 93, now again, I didn't hear this album till recently, but by 93, man, this stuff was just old at that point. And I felt that unlike your experiences listening to it, I felt this album was a little bit derivative. April Wine, yeah, I credit Miles because with you now we've been listening to them from the beginning, and you see the evolution, you see where they're going, you see their influences, and I appreciate that. They didn't just release the same album over and over again. And I appreciate that Miles is listening to maybe Whitesnake and Kiss and Bon Jovi and all these other bands, but I just thought that some of the output, it was like the drums are great, the guitars are chugging, but you know, one song after another, this mid-tempo pace, every song is the same tempo, that I just felt like I was hearing the same song over and over again, and that even included the lyrics. I just didn't think it went anywhere. Whereas he's had albums, I'm like, oh, that's a pretty good turn of phrase. I think that's a pretty good lyric. It wasn't grabbing me, and maybe I needed to sit down and listen to it more and more, but when I'm going through those 14 tracks, it just felt like towards the end, it was like, all right, enough already. Enough. I thought that, you know, it was even funny. You know, in some of the older April Wine, even they had some gimmicky tracks or almost parody tracks, novelty tracks. And I think there was one unintentional one. It was the Voice in My Heart. It's like Mr. Big Extreme with an acoustic guitar solo right out of Kisses Forever. I was like, okay, it's been done already. It was to me, it was unintentionally silly. I just didn't get it. So a couple of the songs, I thought Giving It, Taking It was great. At first, I didn't even appreciate that was Miles singing. It sounded different, but I realized halfway through it was good. The guitar work was great. Harmonies are great. Good from Far, Far from Good, same thing. Another April Wine signature song with choruses and melodies. I thought there was too many ballads on this album. There was one song. What's the name of it? I have it written down. The one about Can't Take Another Night. By the time I got that, I'm like, I can't take another ballad. It was just too much.
But it's such a good ballad, though.
Weird. I get it. It was the heaviest song. It is a very heavy sounding album.
Mm-hmm.
I understand. You know, it certainly wasn't the neutered sound that we had in some of those '80s albums. I agree with Dave. This album is better than Savage Grace and Walking Through Fire. I agree with all that, but I don't view it as in their elite category. I look at this as a middling album, actually. And rather than go through all the songs, you guys did a really good job of it, but you get the gist of where I was going with it. I'm going to give this a 6.5.
6.5.
And I wish it was higher.
I totally get what you're saying, Nick. Like, it probably, if it had come out in 90 or 91, but you know, unfortunately they were dormant. So when they finally came out of retirement, that's why I think I was so pleased that it actually went gold in Canada in 93, because it you know, this was grunge days, right? So I was pleased that there was like melodic rock that was kind of making a dent. If you want the abbreviated album, as it turns out, buy the vinyl. I just now realize it's only got 10 songs on it. I never once thought of the Voice in My Heart acoustic guitar solo in that way. I think Love Your Stuff is the gimmick song on this album. Or It Hurts, but I know what you mean, the acoustic guitar solo. But I think that they were, you know, you alluded to it with Kiss. I think that maybe this CD suffers from what I call hot in the shade syndrome. It's for the first time they're filling up a CD, so let's fill it up. They're certainly not the only band to go through that, but I understand. I mean, not being into it at the time, I totally get where you're coming from. Where maybe it wouldn't have hit you quite the same. With me, it was It was like the exciting entry point into a band. This was the album that was current. Now, I used to think it was my favorite. Over the years, Harder Faster has probably supplanted it as my favorite album. And Dave is right. Harder Faster is probably the heavier album as far as how the songs are put together. But sonically, I don't think they've ever had this much production punch.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no doubt. And I thought it's a great sounding album. I think my problem is too much chunka, too much keyboards over the top. Like I know it was coming. Like to me, it was like that. It was sort of a paint by numbers 80s/90s album, but the sound wise, it was great. Yeah, no doubt about it.
For me, what was interesting with this album was, I have to admit, when it came out in 93, I completely ignored it. I heard If You Believe in Me, and I thought, wasn't that interested, didn't buy it. One of my good friends from back then bought it, and he said, "Oh no, you got to buy it. It's real good." Then when Apple Music started coming out, I started like buying the songs. Said, "Hey, wait a minute, you know what? He was right. There's some good stuff here. I ranked a 7 out of 10, so I don't love it like some of the other ones, but I realized there's some really, especially That's Love, but there's some other really good songs on this one. So it kind of had a revival for me, really, and like well after it was released for me.
Yeah. Well, excellent. I think that's a fair rating for this. I'd never heard this album either until we started to do this series, and I was trying to get them all together. I was always under the impression that these albums really weren't very good, because I was one of those hardcore April Wine fans. I want that classic lineup. I want that Harder Faster, that Nature of the Beast lineup. And to be all honest, I mean, I wasn't all that familiar with all of the early catalog or the Jim Clinch stuff. I was just in that little niche, believe it or not. For as much as I liked the band, you'd think I would know all about it. But this was part of doing this whole series, to be exposed to it, to see if, it's in my wheelhouse. And of course it is. But I like this album quite a bit. Yeah, it sounds kind of 80s. Maybe in 93 it's a little bit dated. Maybe this would have fit in better in 1988. Maybe the ballads are very 80s oriented. And I think, Dave, you have a good point. For an album that is so hard rocking, sure has a lot of ballads. Well, I mean, Nick said that, sorry. But for an 80s album, it sure has a lot of ballads. But the ballads are so great. And every time a ballad would come on, I don't know. Maybe I'm just old and I like that in my old age. But I think that track, You Can't Take Another Night, written by Brian Greenway, I think it's just great. I would have liked to have seen Brian take a lead vocal on this record. I kind of missed that. And I'd like to have had a Jim Clinch vocal. I mean, he's on there, but it's all Miles. And don't get me wrong, Miles has had a break. Miles sounds great on this record. I like the mix of the record. I like the way the vocals sound on it. I love the background vocals. It's very reminiscent of what came before. It could have been off Nature of the Beast or Harder Faster. I love all of it. Does it sound 90s? It does sound very early 90s. But boy, oh boy, the band is back with a vengeance. And they are rocking harder than ever. And you can tell by the way this record sounds, they're glad to be back and they're really going for it. Yes, there are too many tracks on here. If you look at the Frigate, not so many tracks. So they kind of learned their lesson. I will say that. It could be edited down, and that would be a whole other show in itself. But I think as a whole, I love the ballads. I love the guitar sound on here, and I love the guitar solos. Some of them I can tell are Miles, but I don't know if the other one is. It could be Brian. I can't really tell, because a lot of these guys, if you look at their material in the past, unless you saw like a video or a live concert, a lot of these guys, they're very fluid and they all very similar type of guitar players. So it's sometimes kind of hard to pick out who. But I think the guitar on here is great. If you like heavy April Wine, guitar-oriented stuff, this is the record for you, because they don't get any harder than this. But I think also the more you play it, the better it gets. and no one had mentioned this, but Jerry Mercer on here is a powerhouse, and he always is. And it's so wonderful to see him back, and Jim Clinch.
And it's the
It's
first time
wonderful.
Jerry Mercer's drums have been recorded the way they sound live.
Well, that's a good point, because I think this record really has a live sound to it. It's hard to find any information on it. I did not read Miles's book. I don't know if he touches on this record or anything about the recording of it, but I think it sounds great. If I give this a rating, I'm going to give this, well, let me bring it up. I think I'm going to give it a 7.5. Nowhere near Nature or Harder, Faster or any of that. More, I mean, it's probably Animal Grace is all right, because there's some great songs on Animal Grace, and it's nowhere near my poster over here. I'm just saying, but I think I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10. I mean, it's a good, I would recommend this for somebody if they're getting into April wine. So I've taken all of our totals together, and what I've come up with is a 7.5 out of everybody. So I think that's a fair average. It's a decent record. It's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad.
You got to remember too, this is a band that had been dormant for quite a long time, and it's also a new lineup.
Right.
So, how much rehearsal they've had? They've had maybe, touring for a year or so. Admittedly, I'm colored with nostalgia too.
Right.
So that's maybe why my rating is, but if I had to temper it down, I wouldn't go any lower than 8, but it's a 9 for me.
It's a 9. Okay. I get it. That's good.
The album gets points for being available too, hint, hint, because it's on the streaming services, it's all over YouTube, and it gets points for that. So it's not a frustrating album to locate and find. So I give credit because it's at least out there in the marketplace.
Yeah. All right. So there you go, kids. 7.5. I guess we can wrap this one up. The next episode in our April Wine series, we're looking at Frigate. So stay tuned for that. And I'm going to wish everybody a good evening. John Clauser, Dave Luben, Nick S Squire, and Tim Durling. I want to thank everybody for coming on and talking April Wine. And our April Wine series will continue. So make sure you tune back in. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell, do all that crap. And please check out the links to everyone's channel below here. So, all right. Good night, everybody. And we'll see you on the next one.